So let's jump over to some mixed martial arts talk here. UFC Fight Night 74 is going to be on the same day as WWE SummerSlam, right around the same time, up in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. Headlining the card, we do have the number 5 ranked Max Holloway, a former guest of On the Athlete Inquirer, my second YouTube channel, my website that I do write a lot of blogs on, sports wise. He's going to be going up against Charles Oliveira, who is the 7th ranked featherweight contender in this division. Now, the featherweight division is very, on top of everything. It's the hottest, division in mixed martial arts right now, with Jose Aldo, Conor McGregor as the prime two fighters in this division. The interim champion in Conor McGregor and champion Jose Aldo. They were scheduled to fight just about a month ago, but Jose Aldo pulled out of the fight. It was an interim championship fight between McGregor and Mendes, and McGregor now is the king right now of the featherweight division until McGregor and Aldo fight. But this fight between Charles Oliveira and Max Holloway could have potential title implications depending on the way the UFC wants to hold this, because the winner of this fight could potentially end up in their next fight getting that number 1 contender fight. Max Holloway, like I said, a former guest on the show, has really made a huge impact since debuting in the UFC back in 2012, having just match after match. This guy, fights constantly. You would see him fight, 3 or 4 times a year. On his current winning streak right now, which started all the way back at UFC. The fight card, the Fight Pass kickoff event, Saffiedine versus Lim back in January of 2014. He hasn't lost in over a year now. Potentially can end up going on for another year. 2 years, being undefeated after having a kind of a bit, rocky start, with back-to-back losses to Dennis Bermudez at UFC 160 and Conor McGregor back at UFC Fight Night Shogun versus Sonnen back in August 17, 2013. But he has really built a nice winning streak around him, starting from Will Chope, Andrew Feely, Clay Collard, Akira Corisani, Cole Miller, and most recently against Cub Swanson, submission victory over him at the Machida Rockhold fight back in April. So a victory here for Charles Oliveira, or for Max Holloway, is very huge, because like I said, it could potentially give him a title shot depending on what the UFC wants to do. I know Frankie Edgar, was kind of cheated out of that opportunity against Conor McGregor for the interim champion, but Chad Mendes has lost, multiple title opportunities. His 3 featherweight title fights he has lost, and I still think, it's now back to the drawing board, for Chad Mendes. I think it's time for him to start building up a winning streak. I don't think that, Mendes is right now deserving of a championship fight coming right off of a loss to Conor McGregor. It's now time for a new face to get a title fight against whoever it will be between Conor McGregor and Jose Aldo. So if Max Holloway does win this, I could see Max Holloway potentially going up and getting another opportunity and one more fight before the championship fight. I think he can get a victory against Charles Oliveira. He can end up facing Frankie Edgar in his potential next fight if he does pick up this victory over Charles Oliveira. As for Charles Oliveira, as a completely different, it's a complete turnaround. He has faced, he's currently on a winning streak just like Max Holloway, but Max Holloway has much more of a lengthier winning streak. Charles Oliveira is currently riding a 4-fight winning streak with victories over Andy Ogle, Hatsuhiko, Jeremy Stevens, and Nick Lentz, and he's been kind of up and down. He's missed weight a couple of times, and that has been the biggest question around Charles Oliveira for the past, couple of fights. Is he going to make weight? Is he going to make weight? I still think that if he does pull off I don't want to say it was a huge upset of a victory. Charles Oliveira, an excellent, submission specialist, so Max Holloway would have to, really avoid the ground. He can get into, Charles Oliveira has experimented with, a plethora of different submission holds, from a guillotine to an anaconda to a triangle. He's basically very vicious on the ground, so Max Holloway do have to, really watch Charles Oliveira's ground game. But if Charles Oliveira's safety does submit, Max Holloway or knock him out and gets that victory, it's completely different. I think that Charles Oliveira will have to take another fight in a higher-ranked opponent. I could see a potential fight between him and Ricardo Lamas, or potentially, Chad Mendes. I don't think that, Charles Oliveira is, done or is really, championship ready right now. He can even potentially have a fight against Cub Swanson. Those are 2 other options. I don't think that, Charles Oliveira should, taking on, he's already, knocked down, Jeremy Stevens. He already defeated Nick Lentz. It's now time for him to get a much higher ranked opponent. So a match between, Chad Mendes or, even Ricardo Lamas could also be possibilities. So, but at the end of the day, when my prediction for this fight is, I think it's going to end up being Max Holloway. I think Max Holiday. I was watching a little bit of baseball earlier with Matt Holliday, but Max Holloway, I think he has a much better standing game. I think that's going to be much more of his advantage. Charles Oliveira, on the other hand, he's a good, he can stand and bang. That's great features and all, but you know what? If Charles Oliveira is to pull off this victory, he's got to take Max Holloway to the ground. You rarely see Max Holloway on the ground. I mean, he's really been, commanding, these victories, with his, stand-up, fight style, because you know what? It's completely two different fighters here. Charles Oliveira is going to do whatever it takes to get Max Holloway on the ground, and Max Holloway's goal is to keep Charles Oliveira standing up. But you know what? At the end of the day, I think it's going to end up being Max Holloway pulling away with a victory against Charles Oliveira. I can see this going to a decision, but if it's to end early, I think it's going to end up being Holloway taking down Charles Oliveira, and we could potentially end up seeing Max Holloway versus Frankie Edgar in the near future, potentially by the end of the month, at the end of the year, depending on if Max Holloway wants to take a fifth fight for the year. So this is going into his this is going to be his fourth fight of the year. If he does take the fight against Frankie Edgar, he's going to be entering his third fight in 2015. So very interesting situation out there in Saskatchewan, Canada. Leave your guys' predictions for the fight down below. My name is Justin Kish for the Combat Coverage, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.